and I won't go through their biographies because they are available for you on the website. Instead, what I will do is go right into our discussion. I will ask a series of questions to each of our 5 panelists. I will try and set aside 10 or 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. The audience is able to submit questions through the Q&A function on the Zoom page. And so if I could just quickly then jump to our first panelist, who is Miguel Arce, who is the executive of Pagos Digitales Peruanos, a former banker, as I understand, in fact, a former banker for a Canadian bank, a friend of Canada, and a pioneer when it comes to financial inclusion in Peru. Perhaps I can ask you to start by telling us about the so-called Peru model of financial inclusion and your own work in enhancing financial inclusion through the use of fintech. Over to you, Miguel.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share with you our experience in Peru. Our initiative is around a mobile wallet that is called BIM. It means mobile wallet. It's a collaborative initiative in which right now 26 entities, different banks, different cajas, what we call here, that are minor entities, financial entities. Also the largest public bank in Peru, Banco de la Nación, are joined together in order to create an ecosystem of electric money, e-money, that is the concept that the regulation in Peru is called, in which we try to achieve finance inclusion for all these 10 million people, Peruvian people, that don't have any account with any entity in my country. No? The objective is to they can access to all the services and all the products that already bank people can do with their own mobile wallet, but given by a traditional bank. In this case, when you download your app, you can choose any of these 26 entities in order that they can support you in the conversion of the electric money. No? And right now we have achieved 1 million people using our platform, and we are developing and introducing more capabilities in terms to go all over the country, in the rural areas, peri-urban areas, which they don't, the people, they don't access to a branch or agent correspondent bank, they can reach our services. One of the develop that we are going to do next year is to connect other mobile wallets cross-border, because there are almost 1 million, more than 2 million Peruvian people around the world. No? In Latin America, there are almost 1 million. So we want to include them, develop with other mobile wallets in cross-border nations like Argentina or Chile, for example, in order to develop a cross-border P2P service, in order that these Peruvian people can access to their money in our local branch in real time. So it's a very briefly story.
That's terrific. Thank you. You were saying that there are 10 million unbanked in Peru.
Yes.
Peru is a population more or less the same as Canada, 30 million or so? Or
33 million.
33 million. So 1/3 of your population is unbanked. Yes. And your service has now reached 1 million,
1 million.
of That's very impressive and hoping to grow as well. I'm glad you touched on cross-border transfers. We'll get to that shortly, and we may come back to you for further comments on the issue of remittances. We have a small but very dynamic Peruvian community here in Canada as well. In fact, one of the most famous Peruvian diaspora is a senator in the Senate of Canada, and she'll be very pleased to hear about this discussion and what you have shared with us. If I could turn to Mr. Chen to maybe comment on what we heard from Miguel, and can you validate if this is, you've worked all over the world on financial inclusion and the role of fintechs in improving financial inclusion. Can you comment on what he said? Does this resonate in other parts of the developing world? And are the solutions you're seeing in other countries similar, different? Over to you, Mr. Chen.
Yeah, thank you very much. And certainly Peru is one of the sort of model cases and countries on financial inclusion. Of course, has a long history also in microfinance, which it has performed very well in addition to some of the more recent innovations that we've been speaking about here. And certainly we see those same patterns in some of the best performing countries elsewhere. And I would highlight what they are. Of course, the banking system plays an important role, but we need, in most developing countries, people are underbanked for a reason. It's because the banking system is small. And so we need to make space, especially in less developed countries, for new kinds of players. And in many cases, this is what we call a non-bank e-money issuer, who can issue a very small balance account and do it at a very low cost, and who lives much more on the transactions rather than the balances in the way that a bank might. So much less intermediation, much more on sort of payments transactionality as a business model. So you get big volumes on accounts and transactions. And so certainly Peru has moved down that road. I would add the other important thing that Peru is working on, like many of the countries, is what technology enables us to do, which is ironically or sort of in a contradiction to some of the digital stuff, which is how do you convert your digital value into cash and take cash back to digital value? And this is very important for all of us. Many of us wouldn't use a bank if it didn't have an ATM machine. And the poor are no different in that way. They like digital, but they also need their cash. And so you do need a very dense network of cash in and cash out agents. And so creating the kind of environment where those kinds of business models can thrive is vital for both the cross-border remittances as well as the domestic flow of remittances. And so I think Peru exhibits quite a few of those attributes. But just to say again, making space for entry of some non-bank, non-traditional players, even those that may issue limited electronic money type of accounts, and complement the banks in the way that WeChat in China or others issues a small value, limited functionality account, but has large scale. And then this really dense network of cash in and cash out agents. If that can happen, then the ability to reach a large majority of the population becomes within reach. And we've seen countries like Peru and probably a few dozen others who have really made very significant advances in this way in the last few years. So those are the points that we'd emphasize at CGAP.
That's super. I wonder, Mr. Chen, if you could give us some examples of other countries that seem to be doing a good job in the developing world when it comes to coming up with innovative solutions. Just a quick tour de horizon, if I can put it that way.
Well, there are the classic, countries, and especially there's a bunch in East Africa and a few in West Africa that have really opened up the space for non-bank electronic money issuers. Often the sponsor is a telecom, but that's not exclusively the case. So if you go more over to Asia, you get some non-telecom sponsored electronic money issuers. One of the biggest is bKash in Bangladesh. It's got actually a bank and some tech entrepreneurs behind it. It's not a telecom sponsored electronic money issuer. There are some, so that would be a few others. I mean, India, Pakistan have done very well. Myanmar has made a significant dent. If I start to talk about some of the countries further and further east. You get into Indonesia, we start to blend it a little bit with electronic commerce and ride hailing. There are some real potential to link the use of small value accounts with things like Gojek and ride hailing and some of the e-commerce platforms that are emerging much more in East Asia. So we see a blend of different models, but some of these features are the same, right? Small transactional accounts, the ability to get money in and out very easily, and then the ability to reach a very significant share of the population. So scale really is possible with some of these models. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chen. And we may come back to the question of what some of the best practices are and models that maybe can be adapted in different parts of the world. We've already touched on remittances quite a few times already, and the expert on remittances is with us, Mr. Rata from the World Bank. And if I could just back up to say that the whole point of this panel is to discuss the importance and role of fintech in remittances as a tool for financial inclusion. So if I could ask you, Mr. Rata, to talk a bit about how fintech in remittances does address financial inclusion and give us a sense of what the challenges are on the sending side as well as on the receiving side. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and particularly I wanted to thank Brian as well for bringing me in. And the fact that a large number of recipients of remittances and senders of remittances, so migrants, let's say, they happen to be poor, that they also happen to be financially excluded. They don't have bank accounts. And so there is clearly an overlap. But an important point to remember is that the overlap is not complete. So there will be always a lot of unbanked people who are not migrants or who don't receive remittances. That said, among the people who are not banked, but let's say they're migrants and they send money home, I remember a statistic from WOCU, the World Council of Credit Unions, that I used to cite in the mid-2000s, 2004, 2003, 2005, that they would say, if money, instead of flowing cash to cash, if on one side, the sender went to the bank and sent money, if that person did it a couple of times, maybe the third time, he or she would open a bank account. And on the other side, if the money is received in the form of remittances, it would happen the same way. By the time they gain the confidence and they receive the money maybe second time or third time, they open a bank account. And the moment you do that, then you have this beautiful thing that not everybody is a saver and investor, but banks are the perfect financial intermediaries between saving and investment. So if money goes from instead of cash to bank account, then the bankers come into play, and then you have all the benefits of financial deepening. So that is the beauty of remittances in terms of promoting financial inclusion. That said, most important roadblock on the source end, and I just want to point one statistic and not to belabor that point. Remittances last year, 2019, reached a milestone. They reached $554 billion as flowing to developing countries. $554 billion. At that level, they were larger than foreign direct investment going to developing countries. So all the multinationals sending money, investing, direct investment, that was smaller than the small amounts that were sent by millions of migrants back home. And we knew that remittances were already more than 3 times the size of official aid. So that was 2019. Now this year, we are expecting remittances to fall by about 7.5%, 7.2%. Next year, another 7.5%. But this year alone, foreign direct investment is expected to fall by about 32%, meaning that the gap between remittances and foreign direct investment will widen further. Remittances are more important as a source of financing for developing countries than ever before. So that is one point. Keeping that in mind, the difficulties of even sending money or having bank accounts. In fact, now we know that cash handling is not a good thing because of the contagion risks. You don't want to handle cash. And yet, the contactless means of payments, whether it is digital money, mobile money, internet money, that critically depends on people having bank accounts at both ends, source end as well as recipient end. So these two, financial inclusion and being able to send money and actually staying safe, and migrants staying safe is critical to also the whole community staying safe, not to forget that. So there is that critical interaction between the two, remittances, financial inclusion, and health. And not having bank account is a major problem. One of the most important problem at the source end is ID systems, and banks not giving ID, or they need 2-3 forms of ID and all that. We had made a lot of progress 10 years ago, for example, with matricula consular and all that in the US, but that hasn't happened. The second thing is the money laundering regulation, which is related to the KY, know your client requirements and ID requirements. The money laundering regulations have gone after banks and in a big way. And a lot of banks, those who act as correspondent banks for money transfer companies, especially for the ones that are handling digital channels, many of them are startups. They don't have well-established banking relationships. Commercial banks, correspondent banks, international banks have gone after the remittance accounts or the accounts of remittance companies. And by now, compared to 5 years ago, more than 1,000 money transfer companies have lost their bank accounts. And that is really visible in the case of, let's say, Somalia. So some sort of a recognition, especially during the COVID crisis, and let's say in countries like Canada, somebody has to take the lead and say, as a matter of principle, small remittances are not money laundering. Small remittances, and that has used and benefits millions and perhaps billions of people. You can't call 1 billion people as money launderers. So that is needed, I think. Let me stop there.
Thank you. You've raised so many important issues. I want to jump in on many of them, and we won't be able to go through all of them. But at some point, I may ask Governor Al-Abbasi, I see he's still on the line, if he's available to maybe comment on the issue of anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism. As a central banker, he will have a good feel of the pulse on that issue. But you make a very good point, Mr. Rata. Money laundering surely is not the principal concern when it comes to small money transfers. Actually, I see Governor Abbasi is back. I wonder if you want to comment on that specific issue, small money transfers and the risk of money laundering. How are you dealing with it at the Central Bank of Tunisia?
It was for us, I don't know if you are aware or not, we were part of what we call on the Gafi grey list.
Yes.
And when I took my position in 2018, February 2018, I was under big pressure. And in 17 months, we were able to be out of the grey list. And now we are, I think we have a very, very, very good FIU and are working very well to try to put the right rules, because it's not only matter of dealing with let's say money laundering and counterterrorism issues. I think the problem is to put the right rules, to put the right laws, to put the right process to be able to manage all these risks. That is not easy, and I know very well that for us as a central bank with the government, it was not an easy task. But we went through, and we need to keep the process going. I think it's not, as I said very well, that you have a lot of people who are living in the informal economy. They are living in what they call the cross-border areas between, for example, Tunisia, Libya. Libya is not is under a big conflict. The same in some sub-Saharan countries. They are coming to Libya and after to Tunis. And you know very well that they are not using banks. They are using cash. They are using some other means and tools, etc. That's why it's not easy to manage all these let's say funds, informal funds, but we know very well that we need to put the right tools. For example, I will give you an example. With Libya, we know very well that 2 years ago, there's a lot of Libyans, more than 1 to 2 million coming to Libya to Tunis, and the same from Algeria to Tunis, for a lot of reasons. But for tourism, but health is, let's say, the hospitals are not very well, let's say, in the good, let's say, situation in Libya, and because of the conflict, and they are moving to Tunis. And with the governor of the Central Bank of Libya, we decided to put, some of our technicians working together in order to use, let's say, some techniques between the two central banks to be able to give opportunities for Libyans to get money in Tunis, not to bring the money through, let's say, and perhaps to have some problems in the way from Tripoli to Tunis, because there's a lot of militias, etc. Then I think giving this opportunity for through these two central banks to give the opportunity for the people, to get their money in Tunis, and in a transparent way, and less and less costly. I think it's very, very important. But now we are working on something different. We are working, and there's a very important startup is working on the cross-border payment, and the startup is working with the central bank, and I think now they will be with us in the sandbox regulatory framework. But also they are now I think working with Banque de France. You know very well that it's not easy, to get the Banque de France, because they're working on through blockchain technology, etc. And hopefully we will get this technology, and with the technology we'll be able to give more flexibility and to be more transparent, and to better let's say, as I said in the beginning of my let's say talk, to be able to first to maintain, to manage the risk, but at the same time to give opportunities to the people, to be transparent and to get their fund without high cost. That's what we are trying to do. It's not easy, but we are entering, in this process, and hopefully we'll be able to do it.
Thank you, Governor Al-Abbasi, and I'm glad you touched on the potential for cross-border cooperation in facilitating small money cross-border transfers, including cooperation between industrialized countries, central banks, and central banks in the developing world. And before the end of this conversation, I hope we can get some ideas on how Canada might be able to be helpful in working with other countries in the area of facilitating cross-border transfers and making them work for financial inclusion in the developing regions. But I want to stay on the subject now of rules governing cross-border transfers, standards, and we all know that the wrong standards and the wrong rules can be inhibitants to effective movement of remittances. And I know that our next panelist, Leslie Ann Vaughan, has worked on this issue. I wonder if, Ms. Vaughan, you would say something about the challenge of different standards, different national standards, what you think are some of the key priorities in terms of harmonizing standards so that we can enhance financial inclusion in developing countries.
So I want to bring it alive a little bit with a story. I work at the Modulate Foundation. It's an open source foundation that does work on how do we create public-private relationships and standards and conversations around code, regulation as code. But I bring it alive a little bit with a story. I was part of the original M-Pesa team, which was one of these non-bank issuers that Greg mentioned in Kenya in 2005. I was a fintech person, and we created the system based on first principles as an e-money issuer, and we created a system that is loved by today 20 million people in Kenya. Someone else created a different system in Tanzania that works kind of similarly, and someone created another system, 6 systems in Tanzania, another 3 in Uganda, and that's just East Africa. And that's separate to the MFI ecosystem, and that's separate to the banking ecosystem. So in that region of 3 countries, there are lots of silos, and customers have lots of choices, but nothing kind of works together very well. And out of that, the Gates Foundation were working on, well, how might we create more efficient systems? And they put together a group of fintechs a few years back, and they figured out that actually maybe there's a way to get the mobile money vendors, the banking standards, and some of the fintechs together to actually think about what should the future look like, maybe. Out of this, the Modulate Foundation was created in May this year. It's an independent foundation, non-profit, that has founding members like Google, Omidyar, Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Association, Ripple, and various other big players, where it's about putting the right people in the same space together to think about hard problems like this. Out of this, we have, I think, 3 current implementations that are interesting to know about. We have a national payment switch in Tanzania that banks are coming together with telcos to figure out how do they actually create an interoperable system nationally. We have a cross-border pilot in West Africa, which is a private sector pilot. Orange and MTN Mobile Money came together as a mobile money network to create something. They're using the same kind of standards with different use cases. And then we have a third pilot that started just this year with COVID. In Myanmar, the microfinance institutes were struggling to get loan repayments because of the lockdowns. And so they put together with UNCDF a pilot where mobile money operators in the country, who had this vast network of agents that Greg talked about, could actually use that agent network to do loan repayments for the microfinance institutes. So they started to work together to actually solve problems around COVID using the payments technology. Modulate is just software. It's not a switch. It's some open source blueprint software that helps people think about design patterns with an emerging markets lens and a financial inclusion lens. It looks heavily at kind of the best practices that we've seen in different markets and goes, well, how might it actually look if it was an open loop system rather than lots of silos? And it puts the banking systems together with the non-bank e-money issuer systems and looks at, well, what are the differences and what are the similarities, and how do we put this jigsaw together in a more standardized kind of way? With the benefits being those 3 systems, we should end up in a place where one integration from a Zelle or a Canadian instant payment system could link into those systems, and we start to create low-value instant payment systems that are interoperable across borders with the right regulatory environment and the right corridors being enabled and the right scheme rules, which are separate and very important as well. So that's the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to find ways to create partnerships between fintechs and regulators and switch operators and traditional vendors and banking systems, and trying to make them a little bit more plug and play than they currently are today, with the financial inclusion donor community also as part of the conversation.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And by the way, I invite other panelists to jump in if you have comments on anything that's been said. But before that, I want to ask Brian Doyle to make a comment. By the way, he's the champion for this session. I want to thank him for bringing the group together. And Brian, if I could ask you to build on what we heard from Leslie and Vaughan in terms of, I guess, system integration is the term. and interoperability, what is the role of the big payment players in system integration and interoperability? And more generally, could you comment on the role of industrialized countries, particularly Canada, doing something to make it easier for these cross-border transfers to happen in order to promote financial inclusion around the world? Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'll try to be brief because the people from Martin through to Greg to Leslie and Dilip have all spoken about what I really wanted to speak about and why I championed this session. Leslie, thank you very much because, I mean, I dream of a world where Miguel's system, BIM, could work with Yape completely and could work with YotoPay and could work with M-Pesa. If we had a standard, then all of the mobile money products that have evolved in Africa and Asia, they could be used very, very beneficially to perfect a type of remittance system. And I don't want any bank or any financial institution, governor of the bank here, to feel put back by this or anything. But in some cases, poor people have very little utility for a bank. So I think when we encourage interoperability, which is what the Modulate Foundation is trying to do right now, it's really critical to make those changes. I remember like 10 years ago when microfinance, people were winning Peace Awards for the Graham Bank, you know, for microloans. And everybody thought that was going to be the solution. Everybody thought that was going to be a solution to financial inclusion. There was a really good article in Global Finance just last month about the declining influence of microfinance, MFIs as they're called, simply because of the cost impact, because it's still, their customers basically are high-risk customers. So you have to charge a certain amount of them are not going to pay back the money. So if you're operating even a microfinancial institution in the mindset of a bank, then you end up with some of the same problems. And so I would encourage banks to embrace in Canada, you know, when senators talk about, I would encourage the banks to embrace the fintech society and the fintech industries and the fintech players and use their innovative ideas. I'd like to share one thing, if I may, and what I'd like to do is try to share this one screen, and I'm not on Zoom, but I'll just try this right now. Yeah, right here. Okay, this is a little thing that has occurred in my blog, and I think Greg and I think Dilip and I think even Costa Peric has seen this, and what I'm calling it's KYM. So my strongest, most passionate argument is to start to replace KYC, which I see as an impediment, okay? It's an impediment to the flow of remittances. So I'm starting to say merchants are a fixed location. Merchants do have bank accounts usually. Merchants are licensed. They're known in their community. Because they have fixed location, they're not going to disappear. So, and they can afford to have a good internet connection. When we were doing YotoPay, which is a product we did in Canada, we had a lot of young people embrace it. But even in Canada, we were surprised by the number of kids that would come in with a smartphone and they wouldn't have a data plan. So they couldn't use our mobile money app. So I really applaud what Miguel has done in South America. I can close that again. Miguel, I think what you guys are doing is just absolutely out of the park, a rocket that the world should emanate. And that we should all be copying what the Peruvian model is. And I'm so proud when I open up your, Miguel, I opened up the main page of your BIM that you sent to me. And in big, broad letters, it says, you do not need a bank account. We use your telephone number. So what a neat concept. And that's what I want to move towards, a world where we don't have to, because a lot of the breaches, data breaches, if anybody follows my blog, the IOTA blog on WordPress, they know that for the past 10 years, I've been looking at a lot of the money laundering has been by HSBC or Citibank, the hundreds of millions of trillions of dollars. And a lot of the data breaches have been with big companies. So I'm saying, why don't we re-examine the model? Why don't we focus on a model that is merchant-centric, as they're doing in Peru? And Yape is going to have 10 million users. And what's really, really interesting, Yapay's improved, for anyone who doesn't know, it's one of, I guess, Miguel's competitors, but also one of his partners. It was first opened up by BCP. And I applaud it completely because it's basically merchant-centric. The interesting part to me is that in the next 10 million users they're expecting to have using Yapay in the next year. By the end of next year, they'll have 10 million users, which, as you know, is basically the adult population will have this type of, they still won't have a bank account necessarily. Half the new people using that, 50% of them, were unbanked before. What a telling tale to everybody in the world. That means 5 million people in Peru that never had a bank, because as early as 2014, the unbanked people in Peru represented 80% of the population. So, I mean, as a Canadian group, as a Canadian government, I'd love to see a merchant-centric cash-based system. And you can digitize it. I was going to ask Mr. Chen if he's still there. Can I just ask one more question?
Yes, quickly, please. Yeah,
okay.
Quickly, please.
Gregory, one of the things that you talk about is cash in and cash out, and we talk about digitizing. If everybody has a cell phone, is there a need for it still? Is there a need for cash in and cash out, which is ending?
Well, there might not be. I mean, the short answer is in the long run, maybe not. But in the short run, we still need it because people live still in cash. Their world is in cash. Their families in cash, where they purchase is in cash. They still trust it. Remember, we won't trust the banking system if we can't get money out of the system, right? Yeah. We have to be able to get money out of the banking system if we're going to leave money in the system. So, there is going to be a transitional period where cash in, cash out is vital to making the systems work. As ironic as that may seem at times. At
the bottom of that pyramid, right?
At the bottom, yeah.
Because the merchants...
Can I ask did you want to jump in, Leslie Ann Vaughan?
I just wanted to tell a little story again from the ground.
Yes.
When we launched M-Peso, so we've got 1 billion people in the world who've never used digital services or bank accounts, right? We had the same experience in 2005 in Kenya. And we had customers who would go to the agent's store, take all the money out of their account, count it to make sure that it was real, and then deposit it again. Because they needed to trust the system before they'll leave cash in the digital system. They need to know it's real, that they're not being frauded. And behavior change takes a long, long time. So removal of cash is a game of incentives and trust that is not quick and requires a lot of work on the ground with the implementers on the ground who are doing banking and e-money systems.
Thank you for that. We're not in the world of full digital yet. That's the upshot of your message. I wonder if Miguel or Dilip might want to comment on some of the previous. There's so many issues. I'm not going to direct any, but Miguel, what are your thoughts, please?
One thing about the capillarity, because our infrastructure is about the connection of all the infrastructure of the banks and other entities that are joined with us. But this means in Peru, 33,000 points of sales that are connected in order to make this cash in, cash out, no? But in rural areas and peri-urban areas, we need more. So we introduce our concept that we call the beamers, that are free people, free little point of sales that start to make some business around the neighborhood with some little fees that we pay to them. Now, before the COVID, we have 5,000. In 7 months, we increased to 12,000 of these beamers. Most 1,000 per month increasing, because they understand that with this crisis, this sanitary crisis, they want to do more remote transactions, and they are going to spread the ecosystem, because they find another way to make a little money for the economy that is very, very sad. So it is a very good experience that we have in this sanitary crisis. The other point is, for example, when we introduce the connection to the ATM network of almost 2,000 ATMs for the cash out, the number of transactions increase, but not necessarily the number of transactions of cash out increase. Only to know, our customers know that there is a possibility to cash out cash again, they believe in the system. That is another experience that I can share with you.
Thank you. That's, again, a validation of the need for trust, yeah? That's kind of underlying the whole system. I want to go back to remittances, if I will, and to Mr. Rata. What do you think about interoperability? Is this a pipe dream? Is this where we should be putting our focus and attention, or do you think there are other higher priorities?
Thank you, Senator. My experience and my efforts to also start some kind of build a remittance platform. I talked about it in my TED talk as well, and TED talk was already exactly 6 years ago now. In the end, even when you go to the so-called social impact type VCs and private equity types, the first question they ask is, how much money is it going to make? It's sickening to hear that. So I really don't, I have lost faith in the idea that, you could actually have a for-profit motive and then serve the poor. You have to get out of that and say that I'm here to serve the poor, and then say I'm going to also not go bankrupt in the process, because if I'm not able and if I die, then of course I cannot serve anybody. So then have a realistic, markup. So for financial sustainability, if we have that, then we will have interoperability. Then everything would work. Without that, the idea that for-profit entities will all join, and if we do that, then we will give rise to other trillionaires at the cost of, about what we are seeing now, the extreme inequality. So that's a simple way of putting it, that, I really believe in the whole idea of moving into a non-profit remittance platform, or build the rails and they will come. Build the rails, they will come. If we have that, it would work. And in thinking about that, one observation that has gone missing from the thinking, it was there in the original discussions, but it got missing in the process. You see, if you look at, let's say, the monthly remittance, average size of remittances in the startup period of, I'm losing my mind. The Kenyan, please remind me the name of the
M-Pesa.
M-Pesa. Yes. I had too many thoughts in my mind. I happened to be there on the 18th month of their operation after they had started. I'm talking about 10 years ago. Yeah. And they shared with me the average transaction size. So it's basically started with, I think in the first month it was $68, if I'm not mistaken. And then next month it was $67. Next month it was $66. And by the time I was there, it was $18 lower, and I was in the 18th month. So the average transaction size, that was 10 years ago. Now you're talking about people sending $5 worth of transactions. That's because the cost is low. And that idea that you reduce cost and your volume increases, and your volume increases by a faster rate so that your profitability actually increases in the end. It's very simple economic 101 for economists. But I could not convince that to the large money transfer companies. I have spoken to the boards of some of the largest money transfer companies. If you bring down that remittance cost to something very close to financially what is viable, and with scale and interoperability, you can actually grow that really, really large, then you are creating an equivalent of the internet. And God knows what kind of innovation that would bring. So, big hopes.
Thank you for that.
With one minor problem.
Yeah, can I just ask for a comment from Greg, and I know Leslie and Vaughn wants to jump in as well. And before I ask you to speak, I'm not seeing any questions from the audience. I think that means they are so enthralled by what you are saying that they're not going to interrupt you, and we've got enough to discuss just amongst us. So, Greg, and then to Leslie Ann.
Well, I'll only tell you quickly what's on my mind as I hear a lot of this. So it also on my mind is what can Canada do, right? And sort of talking in that context. So I think the work that Leslie Ann referred to around getting more standards in our business, other things, I think all countries and institutions should be a part of that. Because I think we all benefit from that. There's no there's more business in it for all of us. I think that's a win-win proposition across the board for the customers, for the businesses that are involved. There's win-win. I think there's a couple things we're not necessarily bringing up here, but it came up a little bit in the anti-money laundering, countering the AML-CFT discussion. And I bring that up also in the context of sort of correspondent banking, which is a big piece of the international remittance world. And I would say that if there's one answer for a lot of it, I would just think, let's think in terms of proportionality. A lot of the retail transactions that we're talking about do carry some risk, but it's a very, very small risk. But we put on kind of, in the business correspondent world and some of the KYC world, we put on layers of risk protection that are disproportionate to the actual size of each individual transaction. That's partly because payment systems have been built for very large transactions and for large flows. But now we're talking about people and what I would say would be the sort of retail payments world. And our systems haven't been built for that. And so I think we could all contribute to greater standardization and a proportionality across the board in how correspondent banking and how AML-CFT is done in order to promote this retail payments world that doesn't carry the level of risk that some of the systems have actually been built for. So I think we've got a misalignment a little bit in how the global architecture has been built and what individual families need.
Thank you, Leslie.
It's not very specific, but
it's very helpful.
The term of proportionality, I think, helps. And so embracing that across the board. Standards is another one, as Leslie Ann had raised as well.
I really resonate with what Greg says. We are looking heavily at proportionate risk and how do we help regulators think about proportionate risk. I mean, M-Pesa was born out of proportionate risk. We created the concept of tiered KYC and we allowed people with minimal paperwork to open a non-bank e-money account. And that was the start of something that we used FATF regulations to do that. We looked at the regulations and we saw that we could do $1,000 a year. And actually for a poor person, that is a lot of money. So we used that to design what we were talking about in Kenya. Now that doesn't translate easily across borders. So the conversations become hard across borders. So we're actually looking at how do we help regulation as code? How do we help regulators to understand what we mean when we say tiered KYC and actually use regulatory sandboxes to start to talk about these kind of things and what does it really truly mean before we then get into designing the regulations? I think it's a really important point. And we also are looking at shared fraud and risk management services. How do we use technology differently at the center where there's still data privacy issues, all those kind of things to deal with, but maybe there's a way to do something to help the AML-CFT conversation along by working in a way that we work collaboratively on shared services. So these are the kind of things in our roadmap, and the open source foundation model of thinking about these things is a way for people to collaborate and create the future together. So it's a come to the conversation, Canada.
Thank you. Miguel, and then to Brian after that. Miguel first, please.
Sure. I want to share with you a story, There is 200 Peruvian people in Chile. 100, the half, are nannies.
Nannies, yes.
Nannies, housekeepers, nannies.
Caregivers.
They send to Peru $150. They pay in the traditional procedures $15 for this service.
Yeah, it's criminal.
So we made the numbers, and working with a wallet in Chile, we can do it for $2 using the exchange traditional rates, no? But if we use blockchain, like Moja Loop procedures, maybe in a standard procedures, more cheap.
For sure.
So this is how we can really focus this concept and apply in the real life, no?
That's very helpful. Brian, please do comment, but I want you to also go back to the question that I asked you previously, which is the role of the big payments processors like PayPal and so on. What's the role for them?
I think they can play a role for sure. In fact, if you look at our blog, one of the things, even the diagram I showed you, PayPal has just allowed people to start using cryptocurrencies to store, pay, plus they're being tied to what's called a stable coin. So I see a very big role for them. But I kind of question, as does Dilip, that, PayPal is a for-profit entity. I appreciate that. I live in a country that basically we subscribe to capitalism. But I'm of the mind, a Yodo Foundation intends to send free. So we intend to remit without fees. We're trying to reduce and send. And we did that with the World Council. Some of you have seen what we did with the World Council invited us to remit into Ukraine. And we sent $100 cash, hand in hand to hand in other hand, in less than 30 seconds for no charge, instantly without a bank intermediary. So they have a role to play. But again, I think it should be with the merchants. I think if I had a magic wand, I'd say, okay, every merchant in the world has to use PayPal right now. And you have to have a crypto account. Little merchants in India or Myanmar do not want anything to do with that. But PayPal is saying that they will pay it out in local currency. But they'll have the benefit of a blockchain. And someone as big as PayPal could do it. So depending on the fees, I think they have a tremendous role to play if they would focus their work on the merchants. They don't want to do that, obviously. They want to get every little person in the world to have a PayPal account. Let me just finish with one thing. I really appreciate everything everybody said. One of the things that, and Dilip had said, during this pandemic, there's been a reduction in cash handling. Everybody's worried about it because of COVID-19. It's a real issue. One of the things, I don't know if you've seen, but we created these little products. And we have kids that are like 8-year-old kid that has this and buys candy with this. And his father can send money to this when he wants to top it up. And this is a piece of paper that is printed on a little printer like this, a Kodak printer. The merchant has this. The merchant has internet. They print this. They give it to the kid. And then people anywhere in the world can send money to this tag. So again, we don't have to have digital. And Greg Chen was making that point when cash in, cash out. You don't necessarily have to have a digital. You don't necessarily have a smartphone. There's a lot of people in the world. So we can encourage the big operators like the Visas of the world, the Better Than Cash Alliances of the world. We can encourage them to work with the small indigenous merchants worldwide to provide that settlement mechanism. Then we could let the poor people, set my people free. We could let the poor people deal in cash that they prefer dealing with, even if it's in a digital form, and even if they don't have a telephone. If they got a telephone, that's great. The product we're doing is this small. That's the point of sale. We've got products that cost $9. $9. Okay? Give them to the merchants. Give them to the merchants and let PayPal work with us. So yeah, encourage open banking, as the senator said. Let's try to get McGill to work with M-Pesa or with one of these other operators. I was in Chile too, same issue. Huge amount of Peruvians, overseas workers there, remitting money. They're all poor people. They're remitting home to rural parents to support them. Why do we have to charge them $15?
Okay.
It doesn't make sense. So is there a role? Yes.
Got it.
You got to take a nonprofit approach.
Lovely. Look, we're coming to the end of our session, but I'm going to give Leslie Ann, Greg, Dilip, and Miguel a chance to make any final comments. You can react to Brian's comments or give any final thoughts. We're not going to come to a conclusion. It's a big problem, and all of you are doing good work in your own respective fields. But why don't I start with Miguel, and then Dilip, Greg, and Leslie Ann. Miguel, please.
No, just to share with you our vision for the next year in order to create a Latin American wallet. We have already are in a good conversations with wallets in Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Uruguay. So maybe you will have some very good news next year. Great
way Wonderful. To end from Miguel. Dilip, please.
Just thank you, Senator, and all my fellow panelists. I want to just emphasize again that need for a group of people to come together with financing and create a non-profit platform. I think we really need that as an alternative. There will be always value-added products that can be built and a lot of money can be made, but creating the foundation is necessary. The rails on a non-profit basis or on a small markup financially
cost recovery
basis.
Cost recovery, love it, Senator.
Very good. Thank you, Dilip. Greg.
Yeah, I think there's lots of things one could say, but let me say the one I've heard crypto mentioned a few times. The one real strong use case that I've seen that's encouraging to me is to get around this correspondent banking system and use crypto as the go-between currency. There's some real potential efficiencies there, and it could really bring down the cost in certain corridors if the correspondent banking system is not reacting. And I think the more we use it, the more the banking system will also react and become more efficient themselves.
Yes, it's in their interest, isn't it? Leslie Ann, please.
I want to respond to Dilip and say that what we are not is Rails. We aren't creating an open source. We aren't creating Rails. We're not running and operating in Switch. But we have the software for anyone out there who wants to run the kind of system you're talking about, Dilip. It's freely available to anyone. And so hopefully it's the seed of thinking about things like that. We also are a very neutral brand. I think sometimes we talk about PayPal's and Facebook's and Libra and all these kind of things. And there's a very big player in that conversation who possibly has an agenda. Our goal is to keep the brand very neutral and make it a public-private partnership and create a way for those kind of conversations. But we need people to run the rails. And that's the kind of people that we want in our community to figure out how do they adopt the software and get what your vision, bring it alive.
Well, colleagues, having the conversation is exactly what we've done now for the last 2 hours, first on open banking broadly and now more specifically on remittances and the role of fintech. This has been a really rich discussion. I've learned a lot. I hope you've also enjoyed being on this panel. I know that the audience will have benefited greatly. I know the organizers will be really pleased with what they've heard. I'll be consulting with them in terms of what kind of recommendations or next steps might be put forward for the conference as a whole. They may well be in touch with you, but we've kept you for a long time already. It's late for some of you in other parts of the world. So I want to thank everyone, all of your panelists. I want to thank Brian in particular for being the champion. I want to thank you, Vic, and the sponsors of this event, and of course to our audience who've been so patient with us. So all the best to everyone, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.